Tunnels, written by Roderick Gordon. Chapter 1 of Tunnels. The pickaxe hit the wall of the earth, and it sparked an unseen shard of flint, and it sank deep into the clay, coming to a sudden halt with a dull thud. This could be it, Will. Dr. Burrows crawled forward in the cramped tunnel, sweating and breathing heavily in the confined space. He began feverishly clawing at the dirt, his breath clouding in damp air. Under the combined glare of their helmet lamps, each greedy handful revealed more of the old wooden planking beneath, exposing its tar coating a grain and splintering surface. Pass me the crowbar. Will rummaged around in his satchel and found the stubby blue crowbar, and he handed it to his father, whose gaze was fixed on the area of the wood before him. Forcing the flat edge of the tool between two of the planks, Dr. Burrows grunted as he put all of his weight behind it to gain some purchase. He then began levering from side to side. The planks creaked and moaned against the rusting fittings until, finally, they billowed out, breaking free with a resounding crack. Will recoiled slightly as a clammy breeze bled in from the ominous gap that Dr. Burrows had created. Urgently, they pulled two more of the planks out of place, leaving a shoulder-width hole. Then they paused for a moment in silence. Father and son turned and looked at each other, sharing a brief conspiratorial smile. Their faces, illuminated in each other's light beams, were smeared with the war paint of dirt. They turned back to the hole, and they stared in wonder at the dust motes floating like tiny diamonds, forming and reforming unknown constellations against the night-dark blank opening. Dr. Burrows wearily leaned into the hole. Will squeezed in beside him to peer over his shoulder. As their helmet lamps cut through the abyss, a curved tile wall came into sharp focus. Their beams, penetrating deeper, swept over old posters whose edges were peeling away from the wall and waving slowly, like tendrils of seaweed caught in the drift of a powerful current at the bottom of the ocean. Will raised his head a little, scanning even further along until he caught the edge of an enameled sign. Dr. Burrows followed his son's gaze until the beams of their lamps joined together, that clearly showing the name. Highfield and Crossling North. This is it, Will, this is it! We found it! Dr. Burrows' excited voice echoed around the dark confines of the disused train station. They felt a slight breeze on their faces as something blew along the platform and down onto the rails, as if sent into an animated panic by its rude intrusion after so many years into this sealed and forgotten catacomb. Will kicked wildly at the timbers at the base of the opening, throwing a spray of splinters and hunks of rotting wood, until suddenly the ground below him slid away and spilled into the cavern. He scrambled through the opening, grabbing his shovel as he went. His father was immediately behind him as they crunched a few paces on the solid surface of the platform, their footsteps echoing and their headlamps cutting swaths into the surrounding gloom. Cobwebs hung in skeins from the roof, and Dr. Burrows blew as one draped itself across his face. As he looked around, his light caught his son, a strange sight, with a shock of white hair sticking out like bleached straw from underneath his battle-scarred miner's helmet, his pale blue eyes flashing with enthusiasm as he blinked into the dark. Dr. Burrows himself was a wiry man of average height. One wouldn't have described him as tall, or for that matter short, just somewhere in the middle. He had a round face with piercing brown eyes that appeared to be all the more intense due to his gold-rimmed glasses. "Look up there, Will. Look at that," he said as his light picked out a sign up above the gap through which they had just emerged. "Way out," it read in black letters. They turned on their flashlights, and the beams combined with those of their weaker helmet lamps ricocheted through the darkness to reveal the full length of the platform. Roots hung from the roof, and the walls were caked with effervescence and streaked with a chalky lime scale where fissures had seeped moisture. They could hear the sounds of running water somewhere in the distance. "How is this for a find?" Dr. Burrows said with a self-congratulatory air. "Just think. Nobody has set foot down here since the new Highfield line was built in 1895. They had emerged onto one end of the platform, and Dr. Burrows now shone his flashlight into the opening of the train tunnel on the other side. It was blocked by a mound of rubble and earth. "It'll be just the same down at the other end. They would have sealed both tunnels," he said. "Dad! Dad, over here!" Will called. "Have you seen these posters? We can still read them. I think they're ads for land or something. Oh, and here's a good one. Wilkinson's Circus, to be held on the Common, the 10th day of February, 1895. "There's a picture," he said breathlessly as his father joined him. The poster had been spared the water damage, and they could make out the crude colors of a red big top and a blue man in a top hat standing in front of it. They walked further along, stepping around a mountain of rubble that spilled onto the platform from an archway. That would have led to the other platform, Dr. Burrows told his son. They paused to look at an ornate cast iron bench. "This'll go nicely in the garden. All it needs is a rub down and a few coats of gloss," Dr. Burrows was muttering as Will's flashlight beam alighted on a dark wooden door hidden in the shadows. "Dad, wasn't there an office or something on your diagram?" Will asked, staring at the door. "An office?" Dr. Burrows replied, fumbling through his pockets until he found the piece of paper he was searching for. "Let me have a look." Will didn't wait for his answer, pushing at the door, which was stuck fast. Quickly losing interest in his blueprints, Dr. Burrows went over to aid his son, and together they tried to shoulder open the door. It was badly warped in the frame, but on the third attempt it suddenly gave, and they tumbled into the room. A downpour of silt covered their heads and shoulders. Coughing and rubbing the dust from their eyes, they pushed their way through a shroud of cobwebs. "Wow," Will exclaimed quietly. There in the middle of the small office, they could make out an old desk and chair, furred with dust. Will moved cautiously behind the chair, and with his gloved hand, he brushed away a layer of cobwebs on the wall to reveal a large faded map of the railway system. "Could have been the station master's office," Dr. Burrows said. Two of the walls were lined with shelves stacked with decaying cardboard boxes. Will selected a box at random and lifted off the misshapen lid, and he looked in wonder at the bundles of old tickets. He picked one of them out, but the perished rubber band crumbled, sending a confetti of tickets spewing all over the desktop. "They're blanks. They wouldn't have been printed up," Dr. Burrows said. "You're right," Will confirmed, never ceasing to be amazed at his father's knowledge, as he studied one of the tickets. But Dr. Burrows wasn't listening. He was kneeling down and tugging at a heavy object on the lower shelf that was wrapped in a rotten cloth that dissolved at his touch. "And here," Dr. Burrows said, as Will turned to look at the machine, which resembled an old typewriter with a large pole handle on its side, "is an example of early ticket printing machines. It's a bit corroded, but we could probably get the worst of it off." "What, for the museum?" "No, for my collection," Dr. Burrows replied. He hesitated, and his face took a serious expression. "Look, Will, we are not going to breathe a word of this to anyone. You understand?" "Huh?" Will spun around, a slight frown creasing his brow. It wasn't as if either one of them went around broadcasting the fact that they had embarked on these elaborate underground workings in their spare time. Not that anyone would be seriously interested anyway. Their common passion for the buried and for the as yet undiscovered was something that they didn't share with anyone. Something that brought father and son together, a bond between them. Because his son hadn't made any sort of response, Dr. Burrows fixed him with a stare and went on. I don't have to remind you what happened last year with the Roman villa, do I? That big wig professor turned up, hijacked my dig, and grabbed all the glory. I discovered the site, and what did I get? A tiny acknowledgement buried in his pathetic effort of a paper. Yeah, I remember, Will said, recalling his father's frustration and outbursts of fury at the time. Well, we don't want that to happen again. No, of course not. Well, I'm not going to be a footnote on this one. I'd rather nobody knew about it. They're not going to nick this one away from me. Not this time. Agreed? Will nodded in assent, sending his light bouncing up and down on the wall. Dr. Burrows glanced at his watch. We ought to really be getting back by now, you know. All right, Will replied grudgingly. His father caught his tone. There's no real hurry here, is there? We can take our time and explore the rest of it tomorrow night. Yeah, I suppose, Will said half-heartedly, moving towards the door. Dr. Burrows patted his son affectionately on his hard hat as they were leaving the office. Sterling work, Will, I must say. All of those months of digging really paid off, didn't they? They retraced their steps to the opening, and after the last look at the platform, they clambered back into the tunnel. 20 feet or so in, the tunnel blossomed out so that they could walk side by side. If Dr. Burrows stooped slightly, it was just high enough for him to stand. We need to double up on the braces and the props, Dr. Burrows announced, examining the expanse of timbers that was up above their heads. Instead of 1 every 3 feet, as we discussed, they're about 1 in 10. Sure, no problem, Dad, Will assured him, somewhat unconvincingly. And we need to shift this pile out, Dr. Burrows continued, nudging a mound of clay on the floor of the tunnel with his boot. We don't want to get too constricted down here, do we? Nope, Will replied vaguely, not really intending to do anything about it at all. The sheer thrill of discovery resulted all too often in him flouting the safety guidelines his father had tried to lay down. His passion was to dig, and the last thing on his mind was to waste time on housekeeping, as Dr. Burrows called it. And in any case, his father very rarely volunteered to help with any of the digging himself, only making an appearance when one of his hunches paid off.